Today we're going to talk about an idea so big, so fundamental that we don't even see it anymore. And that's the idea of a number. Not just, counting things, but the abstract concept of three all by itself. It's an idea that powers literally everything around us, from our phones to our economy. But here's the thing. It wasn't dreamed up by some philosopher. It was invented out of pure necessity by ancient accountants in the world's very first cities. So, how do you count without numbers? It sounds like a trick question, right? But this was the actual reality for our ancestors. I mean, sure, they could look at two flocks of sheep and tell you which one was bigger, but they were missing a tool that we completely take for granted, a universal idea of quantity that's separate from the things being counted. And this is the part that kind of breaks your brain a little. For an early Sumerian scribe, the 3 in 3 sheep and the 3 in 3 jars of grain were not the same thing at all. They were completely different concepts. There was no abstract threeness. There was a sheep 3 and there was a green 3. It's just a fundamentally different way of looking at the world.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We're in ancient Sumer, maybe 5,000 years ago. Cities like Uruk are absolutely booming. Society is getting super complex. And the people running the show, the temple authorities, they need to manage a ton of stuff. Land, workers, food, you name it. But they're trying to do all this with a mental toolkit that doesn't even have the basic idea of 3. Just look at how complicated this got. Imagine having to learn a completely different set of numbers for every single category of thing you need to count. We found tablets from Uruk showing they used over 60 different number signs. You had one system for counting your animals, a totally different one for your grain and cheese, and yet another one for land or jars of oil. It must have been an absolute nightmare for the accountants.
So you have to ask, why would anyone put up with a system that clunky? Well, the answer is simple. The entire temple economy depended on it. These guys had to track everything, from rations for thousands of workers to offerings for the gods to how much barley came in from the harvest. The pressure to keep perfect records was just immense, and it was that bureaucratic need that drove one of the greatest innovations in human history. Their first solution was actually pretty physical. They used these little clay tokens. Different shapes meant different things, say a cone shape for a measure of grain. And to keep a transaction secure, they'd seal these tokens inside a hollow clay ball, kind of like an envelope. But then, to know what was inside without smashing the ball, they started pressing the tokens into the outside of the clay before they sealed it. And right there, some anonymous scribe must have had a light bulb moment. Hey, if the marks are on the outside, why do we even need the tokens on the inside anymore? And that simple, practical thought led to this monumental conceptual leap. This wasn't just about making accounting a little easier. This was about changing the very way humans thought about quantity. This moment, this is what paved the way for all of mathematics.
And what's so cool is that we can actually pinpoint this shift in the historical record. So you've got the token system humming along by about 3500 BCE. But then, bam, around 3200 BCE, in Uruk, something totally new starts to show up, a new way of thinking. And it took off like a rocket. Just a few hundred years later, by 2500 BCE, we see scribes using this new math to do things like geometry. The pace of change was just incredible.
This tablet right here, this is it. This is the breakthrough made visible. Look closely. Down at the bottom, you have the symbol for sheep. That's the circle with a cross in it. But up top, you have totally separate marks for the quantity. They're not just stamping a sheep token a bunch of times. They wrote the number, and then they wrote the thing being numbered. For the very first time in human history, number and object were two separate ideas. This is the birth of the abstract number.
You know, the historian Jane R. McIntosh puts it perfectly. This wasn't just some minor adjustment. She calls it the springboard for the development of mathematics. Think about that. The springboard. Everything that came after, algebra, calculus, computer science, it all stands on the shoulders of this one administrative shortcut.
Because once numbers were abstract, once they were untied from objects, you could actually do stuff with them. You could play with them. You could perform real arithmetic. And for a growing city-state, that was like discovering a new superpower. All of a sudden, scribes could do things that would have been impossible before. They could add up all the grain from 10 different farms without having to physically put it all in one pile. They could figure out exactly how to divide rations among the entire city's workforce. They could add, subtract, multiply, and divide. This wasn't just math. It was an instrument of power that allowed them to organize their entire society.
And check out the beautiful, elegant system that grew out of this. Over time, the whole thing got streamlined. They went from those 60-plus specific symbols to a system that could represent any number using just two simple wedge shapes pressed into clay. A vertical wedge and a little corner wedge. That's it. It was efficient, it was scalable, and it was incredibly sophisticated. The system they landed on was base 60, or sexagesimal. And you might be asking, why 60? Seems kind of random, right? Well, it was actually a stroke of genius. 60 is a fantastically practical number because it can be divided evenly by so many other numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, I could go on. For a society that was constantly needing to divide up goods and rations, this just made the calculations way, way easier. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Okay, that's fascinating ancient history. But here's the wild part. This 5,000-year-old solution to a bureaucratic headache is something you personally use every single day.
We've definitely moved on from etching symbols into clay tablets, but the mathematical logic that these symbols represent, it has survived for millennia. It's totally embedded in the very fabric of how we structure our world today. Seriously? Every single time you check your watch, you are counting in Sumerian. Ever wondered why there are 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour? Or why a circle has 360 degrees? That's it. That's the ghost of their base 60 system. It's a direct inheritance from the accounting needs of the world's very first cities. So one of the greatest intellectual achievements in all of human history wasn't born from a desire to understand the mysteries of the cosmos. It came from the super practical day-to-day need to keep track of sheep, jars of grain, and maybe some beer. A world-changing idea that started as an anonymous accountant's shortcut.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What seemingly mundane, practical problem are we solving right now that 5,000 years from today, future civilizations will look back on as the springboard for a whole new way of thinking? What is our generation's invention of the number?